So what I'm going to ask for everyone to do is we're going to stand up and we're going to stretch so that we can get the blood flowing so that my presentation is more exciting. So maybe not the pizza people, but stand up. So everyone stand up and just stretch. So whatever you want to do before, but you're not comfortable, just stretch around, move your muscles. So that way it's not a really boring talk. All right, you can sit down now. It's good. All right, we got some energy in there. So this will still be a pretty quick presentation, but I'll leave a lot of room for questions at the end. So definitely ask some questions, or make sure you can write down your questions, and then at the end we can answer them together. So it'll be more of a dynamic talk at the end. So a little bit more about myself before we continue the talk. So I was in the military for 11 years, and the past 7 years I was with the as a geomatic technician, and the last 4 years I was with the disaster response unit for Canada. And we had responded to, I guess, these activations. So a hot activation would be the same thing for Canada. We would respond to the Philippines Typhoon Haiyan, the Nepal earthquake, in Haiti the first earthquake. And I was part of that team. And this is my story, this is my experience when I was in Nepal in 2015. So a little bit of my personal, I'm also the organizer of the OSM Ottawa group. And we do mapathons. We actually did a missing maps 2 years ago. So we're all really engaged with OpenStreetMap. And I would say I would be using OpenStreetMap for about 7 years or so. So a lot of experience in OpenStreetMap. And now I focus more on the sort of programming, the geeky stuff of it, the data processing. But this was a very mapping-focused event. So who remembers the Nepal earthquake? Can you raise my hand? So everyone knows it's a really big, big event. A very big magnitude earthquake, a 7.8 in 2015 that pretty much took over a good chunk of the country. And this will be the experience that I've felt through, and the damage. So there's a lot of damage that happened. 8,000 people killed, 16,000 injured, 2.8 million displaced, and almost 500,000 homes destroyed. And all these photos that you would see on Google or on Street View or on all these photos, they're actually real. They were not fake, they weren't photos that were staged. All these photos in the background are actually Nepal disaster photos, and it's villages, entire villages that were like this. They're not fake. So definitely a lot of those two earthquakes, there's a 7.8 and a 7.6. When we showed up in the country, it was about 5 days after the event happened, and then about 10 days after, there was another 7.6, which shook the country even more. So when everything was going good, it got worse. And that can happen in all the disasters, I think, with even the hurricanes right now. You got one going in, and then you got a second one following it. So a lot of these disasters will actually have a second effect and a lot of ripple effects. We had about, when I was in the country for about a month, there was about 160 aftershocks. I actually got so used to having earthquakes that it got normal having about 4 earthquakes a day. And it was really strange when I came back to Canada because everything felt like an earthquake. A garage opening, a big truck on the road. So I have definitely a lot of good feelings for the Nepal population. They're living in this all the time. And it's they're a really resilient population. And yeah, I envy the Nepal population. They're really resilient. I was only there for 1 month, and I could just imagine living in that situation. It'd be really, really hard. So the response, tons and tons of countries were showing up. We had different organizations, the Red Cross, everyone was helping out. So about 330 humanitarian agencies that included different countries. Every country was in that response to help out. And humanitarian activities, that included all sorts of different activities, medical, wash, giving tents, giving food supplies. All sorts of different activities were happening concurrently at the same time. And that required a lot of attention, a lot of planning was involved to make these activities happen. I mean, how hard is it to deal with one organization or 2 organizations? Imagine you had 330 different organizations, all in one country, wanting to help, but then it's really hard to coordinate. So the UN would actually be there involved to help that coordination. Yeah, and like I said, there was a lot of money. The amount of funds, the damage that actually caused these earthquakes, they had estimated it was about $432 million of money to be spent to fix the disaster, and only 88 million were actually received from the international partners. So this was a massive damage to the country economically. But there's definitely a lot of funding, and a lot of people were helping out with the response internationally, locally. Everyone was helping. So this is our part. So we had deployed, Canada just decided to deploy our Canadian our disaster assistance response team to Nepal. We were about 200 people that actually showed up to country. Like I said before, 5 days post-event. So event happened on a Friday. Actually, I know it was a Friday because nobody works on a Friday. So we were trying to get map data. On a Friday. Nobody's working on a Friday, and nobody's working on a Saturday. And then we had left on Sunday. So those disasters are not planned. They're not going to be on a Monday to 8 to 4. You know, if all the disasters were on 8 to 4 on Monday to Friday, it'd be amazing. But it seems that all the disasters that we have always fall on a Friday when nobody's working, and you can never get any help. So when we left, we actually brought a lot of equipment. We actually had to bring in all these big planes to bring all the equipment. So our engineering equipment was bulldozers, backhoes, all the things to do rubble removal, removing roads, removing safe buildings, removing all these big boulders out of the roads. And you can imagine how much a big bulldozer weighs. We had to bring that in a plane. So it was a lot of flights back and forth from Canada to Nepal, Canada to Nepal. And also we brought a lot of water, we brought a lot of food. So the engineering is a big key component. They also bring water filtration units, like I said, heavy equipment, water filtration. The mobile medical team, they were really amazing. They actually came out to the villages. They went as far as we possibly can to go and help out. I think this is actually one of our medics helping out, whether it be light injuries or heavy injuries. They would show up for about 5 days or so in the village and help out medically. The big thing too is they actually did training too. We always talk about if it's better to train the people to do medical assistance than to just do it yourself. So they actually brought little flyers to say like, how do you boil water? How do you make a tent? And I had to print all those posters. So I printed all those posters as a mapping guy. I was able to print out all the training materials and all the things that we were giving out to the local population. So training, medical was really good, and also training for, so our next one was a geomatic support team, and that was my team. It was a team of 1 for the beginning, and then my second, helper came in after about 2 weeks post-earthquake. So I was there for a month, and I only had my second helper 2 weeks in. So I was involved to support everything that's mapping. So I would produce products, mapping, and I'll show you some examples of the things I created or produced, and it was entirely made with OpenStreetMap. And also liaison officers. So these officers would actually go in the field and actually do the assessments. So the big part of a disaster relief effort is where do you need help? And that's the hardest question. It's figuring out where you actually need help. So we actually had officers, there was military officers, civilian, government officers, that would actually go to every single village and do assessments of what they would need. And they had this little cheat sheet card, about 10 or 12 questions that I think a lot of people are doing, trying to build apps for it now, kind of like the key critical questions that you need to ask for a village that are really important to know the needs and the wants of the village. So these would be really important. They would just go in the field and assess and report it back to. So then after what happens with after they got information, then the Red Cross, World Food Program would then deliver those goods or those needs to those villages. All right, so I've definitely missed some logos because it's probably not on a room, but these are all the companies that I've personally been involved with for the disaster response, but there's way more. So If your company is not there, then don't yell at me. I know there's no Facebook in there, but I'm sure you're involved somehow. So the ones that I was kind of really involved with was Digital Globe. They provided imagery right off the bat. So one of the good stories with Digital Globe was, if you're trying to map a disaster, then using legacy or archived imagery is not really good. You want up-to-date imagery. So when we showed up, they had imagery for us. They had a 1 terabyte brick that they gave us to us. World Food Program, they have a logistic cluster that they would map out all the road conditions to make sure that the road is open or the road is not open. Because their job, World Food Program, is to move food from point A to point B. So they actually need to know how are the roads and how are the conditions. Is this road closed? Is this bridge closed? And how will that impact my navigation? So I work really close for them and actually take all their products and I give it to my officer for my planning purpose because they make really, really good products. And all their data that they use is OpenStreetMap, which is amazing because everyone's using the same data internationally. And also the first person I actually went to is Kathmandu Living Labs. So that was the first day I showed up, I was in uniform, and I'm like, I need to go see Kathmandu Living Labs. So by a raise of hands, who knows Kathmandu Living Labs? Perfect, awesome, it's like half the crowd, it's amazing. So they did amazing work. They were actually the on-the-ground liaison sort of OpenStreetMap team. They helped bridge the gap between the private sector, the local needs, and HOT Summit as well, the HOT community. So they were a really key component for the success of the Nepal earthquake response. And that's why they're there right next to the OpenStreetMap. And I can keep going on with all these other providers. Another the big one that's right here, Map Action. They're actually a really big force. Do we have any folks from Map Action here? I'm sure we do. There you go. You're amazing. So they're like in and out, not sleeping ever. They had rotated every week, new people, because they would burn out because there's so much mapping to do. So they're great guys, really good companies to work with. They were they're working with the UN in the UN tents to make the products for anybody, really, like all the mapping organizations. We're an open shop. Any organization, any non-profit organization can show up and be like, I want a map of this area. And Map Action or myself or someone else will make that map. But there's only a few geo people in town, so the Map Action people just really never slept. And then they rotated a new person, and then he never slept, and then they rotated another person, and he never slept. Well, I was there for a whole month, so I needed to sleep a little bit. And yeah, I can keep going on with all these organizations, but they're all essential. Oh, and the Mapbox data team. The Mapbox data team did do a lot of collection with all the volunteers, so they're a big part of kind of completing those task managers. So this is a type of key critical things that were really a good success during the mission or during the operation of the relief effort. The OpenStreetMap updates. We had GeoFabric. So who knows GeoFabric? We'll raise a hand again. GeoFabric? Perfect. And that's kind of where you get your data, I guess. If you want a snippet of Nepal, you would go to GeoFabric and download a clip of Nepal. And what's really great is that Kathmandu Living Labs partnered with GeoFabric to do an hourly, or I think it was a 30-minute update. So instead of waiting for an entire day for your OpenStreetMap data, it would happen every 30 minutes, or 30 minutes or an hour. And on every hour, I can go download the Nepal data set in OpenStreetMap and use it for my mapping products. And that was a really key critical infrastructure because the data was changing so fast that even within 12 hours, the country was like a different country. So a lot of map edits really fast. So having really up-to-date current OpenStreetMap data was really key critical things. Obviously the task manager was amazing. Without that, it'd be impossible to coordinate all these volunteers. So that's a key critical infrastructure that is essential for every hot activation, and I think we all know that. And the latest and greatest in imagery. Again, I talked about Digital Globe. They were really helpful to provide up-to-date imagery and actually publish them for editing in OpenStreetMap. So having the latest and greatest imagery up-to-date of post-disaster and maybe pre-disaster as well is really good to do your mapping. And decision aids. So I want to kind of show you in the back, and if everyone can see, The table, it's a little hard to see the actual contents of that table, but every single piece of paper is a map with OpenStreetMap on there. And you see how many officers and how many military people. It would be the same thing with NGOs, UN. You just have tons of maps, and they're all with OpenStreetMap. So essentially, every time that you edit a map in OpenStreetMap, you're actually contributing to the overall grand picture of the UN, or the military, or the local organizations. So everything is a decision aid in different angles, right? If it's big level or small level, if you're a helicopter pilot and you just want to know all the town names, perfect. Those would be the planning tools. So I'll show you a few maps that I created. So this is like the bread and butter of all the topo maps, is you would have your roads, your bridges, your contour lines, and every single town name there is, and this is a typical map that you would receive from a map action or ourselves. So you'd have a topo map you can actually navigate with. The battleship one was actually a really interesting one, was where we had an engineering detail. So everyone was in that town, but there was so much rubble that it was so hard to actually know which roads. So what we did is we made intersections of each point and each crossings, and that became Whiskey 5, or Charlie 2, or Echo 3. And what happened is actually this map became a radio call sign. So everyone knew these points, like these little battleship. When you're playing Battleship, you'd say, okay, I'm at Sierra 4, and I'm going to Charlie 4, and I'm going to Whiskey Mike. And then people would actually use this on the radio to actually transmit where they are. So this map actually became a call sign on the radio, and people didn't even need the map anymore. And these road names are now in OpenStreetMap, so if you're actually looking for Road 5 and Road 4, I label them as Road 5 and Road 4. Very creative, right? And these are very big, so this term came from the Americans. BAM. Can anyone guess what BAM is? What is it? No? 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 Any guess? It's a big-ass map. It's very creative. So the Americans always want that. They're like, I want a big-ass map. And then I asked them, I was like, well, how big is your table? Or how big is your wall? I can make a big-ass map, but just tell me how big you want it. So those are the big-ass And they're used for planning, right? You have your zones, your little flags, the little army men that people play with. And usually those are your zones of operation. And every single blue zone, it's kind of hard to see, but those little dotted blue zones, there was a hot task manager created for those zones. So where we had people, all the blue zones, we had a task manager for it. So it was really amazing. Those zones got completed really fast. And after that we were done, then the Red Cross would show up after. The next key one is imagery. I mean, everyone loves imagery. It's actually really easy to make. I just have to load imagery and that's it. So making an imagery product is really easy. I just have to take digital globes, really nice work, and just put it in the map and then print it. And you can tell a lot of information from imagery. Obviously this would not be good for machine learning and deep learning neural nets because they'd be buildings all over the place. But it was really, really hard to actually figure out which roads are where. But for the engineering team, it was really critical. The next is GPS units, and you might say like, well, I don't need a paper map. I just want to load my Garmin, my GPS. So we had all sorts of people that were either collecting data with the Garmin Verbs or a GPS camera, and we loaded Garmins with OpenStreetMap data. So not only that you're actually helping the physical paper maps, you're actually helping mobile devices and apps like Maps.me and OSM and all those sorts of different apps. So when you're editing a road, it's actually going on these mobile devices. So moving forward, what the type of things that we would want to kind of do forward that would help out is definitely community engagement. Without Kathmandu Living Labs, it would not be the same response. So that's a key critical infrastructure. The international community helping, and the local community kind of pointing the international community. That's definitely critical. And my favorite is countrywide OpenStreetMap. So having the whole country the same quality. Because then, if the downtown is really good, but then the outskirts are not really good. It doesn't bring confidence to the data set, and then people don't want to use it. So if we had countrywide quality, then there is no excuse to not use OpenStreetMap. Open data government, so in Canada we actually have a lot of cities that are actually opening up their data sets, which is great. So we have more of those, more open data, and then more imports. Resilience mapping, so mapping not in case of a disaster, but in case something could happen. So resilience mapping is really useful, mapping roads, urban areas, so that in case something does happen, they're prepared. And this concludes my presentation, so thank you very much. We can do questions, yeah. No, thank you very much. So, how much do I have time for?
How much time do you have?
Pretty much time.
5 minutes.
You have 5 minutes.
Okay, that works. So if, do you have another mic? Or do you have a mic? So feel free to questions, and if there are very specific imagery questions, I have my friend John Marshall as a remote sensing imagery guru. So if you want to talk about digital globes imagery, let me know, and I'll just redirect it to him.
My question is about languages. In what kind of languages were you operating? Did you provide the information just as road 4 in English, or did you provide it in other languages as well?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So the question was for languages. At first, I started off doing English names for labels, but then after that, we started adding the Nepali name as well for all the counties or the states. So we actually added the two, it would be like a bilingual Nepali English name maps, but only if the data is available. So a lot of things is, if the English label is not there or the Nepali label is not there, you can't make the maps. So we would only do it at the top level, maybe the province or the states. But it was really hard to get that bilingualness for every single town name. But more labels, the better. So. Yeah, you can shout it out.
So you're in the field, infrastructure is the problem.
It's gone.
You're doing live updates to OpenStreetMaps. How do you handle digital communication in the field?
So I would actually be not doing the actual updates to OpenStreetMap. It would be the task manager. Like, I don't think I could do edits. I didn't have enough time to do the edits. But what we did is every about 2 days or so, or every few days, if I would make a new topo map, instead of just printing what I had, I would go and grab the latest and greatest and just hot swap my data. So I would always have every new map that I was printing was always using the latest and greatest. There was actually a lot of Wi-Fi. Surprisingly, internet is the most, it's like, it's above water, You have food, water, and internet's above that. So you always have some connectivity, and that's why I use GeoFabric to download the data dumps, or the shapefile of the country, and I would just update my data every time I produce a product.
One more question? You're just that thorough.
Perfect, all right, thank you very much.